Young boy sells lemonades to cover father's funeral costs. Then J.D. Vance walks in and changes everything. The summer heat clung to the air like a thick, invisible blanket, making the sidewalk shimmer beneath the merciless sun. 12-year-old Lucas Miller wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his arm, adjusting the hand-painted sign he had carefully crafted the night before. It read, in bold, slightly uneven letters, "Lemonade, $1 Help me bury my dad." The words felt heavy, almost surreal. Just a week ago, his father, Mark Miller, had been alive, smiling, telling bad dad jokes while flipping burgers on their tiny back porch, his laughter mixing with the scent of sizzling meat and the distant hum of cicadas. He had always been the kind of man who found joy in the little things, teaching Lucas how to throw a baseball, sneaking an extra cookie onto his plate when Mom wasn't looking, ruffling his hair and calling him champ even when he lost a game. But a sudden heart attack had stolen him away in an instant, as if the universe had pressed pause on a life that should have kept going. Now the house felt quieter, emptier, filled only with echoes of a voice that would never speak again. And, as if the grief wasn't enough, there was the crushing weight of reality, the funeral bill that his mother couldn't afford, the fear in her eyes as she tried to hold everything together, and the gnawing helplessness that settled deep in Lucas's chest. With his mother drowning in grief and medical debt, Lucas knew he had to do something. They didn't have insurance. They barely had enough for groceries, and now the funeral home was asking for money they didn't have. So here he was, standing in front of his makeshift lemonade stand, hoping that the kindness of strangers would help him send his father off properly. The little wooden table wobbled slightly on the uneven pavement. A large glass pitcher, filled with lemonade he had squeezed himself, sat beside a stack of plastic cups. The ice had already begun to melt, watering down the tart sweetness, but Lucas didn't care. He just hoped people would stop, read the sign, and buy a cup. The first hour was slow. A few people passed by, sparing him quick glances before looking away. A businessman in a navy suit walked up, dug into his pocket, and handed Lucas a $20 bill without taking any lemonade. "For your dad," he murmured before walking away. Lucas swallowed the lump in his throat. "Thank you, sir," he called after him, his voice cracking. A mother with a stroller stopped next. She bought 2 cups, giving him a $5 bill. "Keep the change, sweetie," she said softly, her eyes filled with sympathy. By noon, Lucas had made nearly $60. It was a start, but nowhere near enough. Then something unexpected happened. A black SUV with tinted windows pulled up to the curb, and the back door swung open. A man stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. His brown hair was neatly combed, and his piercing blue eyes scanned the lemonade stand with interest. Lucas recognized him immediately. He had seen this man on TV before, speaking at rallies, shaking hands, talking about the future of America, J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States. Lucas's heart pounded in his chest as Vance approached, a warm yet curious smile on his face. People on the sidewalk started whispering, pulling out their phones, snapping pictures. "You selling lemonade, young man?" Vance asked, his voice deep but kind. Lucas swallowed hard and nodded. "Yes, sir." The vice president glanced at the sign, his smile faltering for a second. "For your dad?" Lucas hesitated before nodding again. "He passed away last week. We can't afford the funeral." Vance's jaw tightened, and he exhaled slowly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. "How much for a cup?" Lucas's hands trembled slightly as he grabbed one of the plastic cups and poured the lemonade, careful not to spill. $1, sir." Vance handed him a crisp $100 bill. "I'll take one." Lucas stared at the bill, eyes wide. I don't have change for this." Vance took the cup and took a sip. "Keep the change." The crowd around them gasped, and someone started clapping. Lucas felt his face flush with emotion. "Thank you, sir." But Vance wasn't done. He turned to the small crowd that had gathered. "This young man is out here in the heat, trying to give his father a proper burial. This is what resilience looks like. This is what taking responsibility looks like." The crowd murmured in agreement, and suddenly a man in a polo shirt walked up and handed Lucas a $50 bill. Then a woman in a floral dress gave him 20. One by one, people started coming forward, dropping bills into the small jar. He had set up. Lucas could barely keep up, his hands shaking as he poured lemonade, collected money, and tried not to cry. Vance stayed by his side, talking to people, shaking hands, and encouraging others to donate. Within an hour, Lucas had made over $2,000. When the last customer left, Vance knelt down to Lucas's eye level. "How much do you need?" "For the funeral, son." Lucas bit his lip. "Mum said we need about 5,000. Vance nodded and stood up, pulling out his phone. "Give me a second." Lucas watched, bewildered, as the Vice President of the United States made a call. He couldn't hear everything, but he caught words like fundraiser and media coverage. When Vance hung up, he smiled. "How about we make sure you get more than enough? We'll set up a fund for your dad's funeral and for your family." Lucas felt tears sting his eyes. "You do that?" Vance rested a hand on his shoulder. "Of course, your dad raised a fine young man. It's the least we can do." For the first time in a long time, Lucas felt hope, and everything changed. Lucas could barely believe what was happening. He had started the day with nothing but a pitcher of lemonade and a desperate hope, and now the Vice President of the United States was standing next to him, promising to help his family. A crowd had fully gathered now, buzzing with excitement. Some people were taking pictures, while others simply stood in awe at the moment unfolding before them. A few reporters who had been covering local news rushed in with their cameras and microphones. "Mr. Vice President, what made you stop at this lemonade stand?" one journalist asked, pushing a recorder forward. Vance smiled, glancing at Lucas. "Because this young man represents everything great about America. He's not waiting for a handout. He's working, he's trying, and he's showing the kind of spirit that built this country. I couldn't just walk by." The reporter turned to Lucas. "Lucas, how does it feel to have the Vice President helping you?" Lucas swallowed hard. It doesn't feel real," he admitted. "I just wanted to help my mom and give my dad a good funeral. I didn't think anyone would care this much." A woman from the crowd wiped her eyes. "We care, honey," she called out. "We all do." At that moment, a man in a well-tailored suit stepped forward. He introduced himself as a representative from a major funeral home chain. "I just spoke with my office," he announced. "We'd be honored to cover all costs for your father's funeral, free of charge." Lucas gasped. His breath hitched, and he felt his knees wobble. That was more than he had dared to hope for. Are you serious?" "Absolutely," the man said. "Your dad deserves a proper service, and your family shouldn't have to worry about the cost." Lucas didn't know what to say. He turned to Vance, his eyes wide with disbelief. "I thank you so much." Vance patted his shoulder. "You did this, kid. You put yourself out there. You didn't wait for someone to solve your problems. You started solving them yourself. That's why people want to help." Just when Lucas thought things couldn't get any crazier, the Vice President's phone rang again. He answered it, listening intently before chuckling. "Well, isn't that something?" he muttered before turning to Lucas. "You ever hear of Charlie's Lemonade?" Lucas's jaw dropped. Charlie's Lemonade was one of the biggest lemonade brands in the country. Every grocery store carried it. Yeah, he stammered. "They just called. They want to buy your lemonade recipe and feature your story on their next line of products. They'll pay you for it and give part of the proceeds to your family." Lucas felt like he was floating. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. "I don't even know what to say," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Say yes," Vance said with a grin. "Yes." Lucas said instantly. Yes! The crowd erupted into cheers. More people came forward, slipping money into his donation jar, offering help in different ways. Someone from a local bank offered to set up a trust fund for him. A small business owner gave him a check to help with future expenses. It was overwhelming, unbelievable. By the end of the day, Lucas had collected over $20,000 in donations. His dad's funeral was covered. His family had enough to pay off their immediate bills, and he had a business deal with a national lemonade company. As the sun began to set and the crowd finally started to disperse, Lucas looked up at Vice President Vance. I don't know how to thank you. You already did, Vance said, ruffling his hair. Just keep being the kind of young man your father would be proud of. That's thanks enough. Lucas nodded, blinking back tears. His father may have been gone, but today had shown him something important. He wasn't alone, and because of a simple lemonade stand, everything had changed. As the excitement of the day slowly settled, Lucas found himself standing in front of his lemonade stand, staring at the crumpled bills and folded checks in his donation jar. Just hours ago, he had been struggling to scrape together a few dollars, unsure if he would even make a difference. Now, he had enough money to give his father a proper funeral, enough support to help his grieving mother, and an opportunity he never could have imagined. Lucas's mother, Sarah, rushed to the scene after hearing the news from a neighbor. Her eyes were red and puffy, exhaustion and grief evident in her posture. But as soon as she saw the vice president standing beside her son, with the donation jar overflowing, she froze. Lucas, she breathed, looking between him and J.D. Vance. What is happening? Lucas ran to her, wrapping his arms around her waist. Mom, people helped. The funeral is paid for. We don't have to worry anymore. Sarah looked at the vice president, then at the crowd, her lip trembling. I don't understand, she stammered. Vance stepped forward with a warm smile. Your son is an incredible young man, he said. He stood out here in the heat, determined to help his family. And the people of this town, heck, the whole country, decided to stand behind him. You should be very proud. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. She covered her mouth, shaking her head in disbelief. I don't know how to thank you, she whispered. You don't have to, Vance replied. Your son already did all the hard work. I just helped spread the word. Sarah pulled Lucas into another hug, holding him tightly. You did this? She murmured. Lucas nodded, suddenly feeling shy. I just wanted to help, Mom. You did more than help, she said, kissing the top of his head. You saved us. Just when Lucas thought things couldn't get any more surreal, another black SUV pulled up. A well-dressed man stepped out, accompanied by a woman holding a clipboard. Lucas. Miller? The man asked, scanning the scene with professional precision. Lucas nodded hesitantly. The man smiled. I'm Peter Collins, a representative from Charlie's Lemonade. We heard about your story, and we'd love to discuss a partnership with you. We think your lemonade could be something special, and we'd like to work together to develop a special line with your name on it. Lucas's mouth dropped open. Wait, you mean like I'd have my own lemonade brand? That's right, the woman with the clipboard chimed in. We'd market it as Lucas's Legacy Lemonade, a tribute to your father and a story of resilience. A portion of the proceeds would go to families in need who struggle with funeral costs, just like you did. Lucas turned to his mother, his hands shaking. Mom, is this real? Sarah wiped her eyes, nodding. Yes, baby, it's real. Vance clapped a hand on Lucas's shoulder. This is just the beginning, kid. You took one small act of courage and turned it into something bigger than yourself. That's what leaders do. Lucas swallowed hard, overwhelmed but excited. He thought about his dad, how he used to encourage him to dream big, how he always believed in him. If his father could see him now, he'd be smiling, that same proud look in his eyes he always had when Lucas accomplished something. A small lump formed in his throat. But this time, it wasn't just grief. It was hope. The next few days were a whirlwind. News stations across the country picked up Lucas's story. Reporters wanted interviews. Donations continued pouring in. Strangers from across the country sent letters of encouragement, some even sharing their own stories of struggle and resilience. Charlie's Lemonade wasted no time. They flew Lucas and his mother to their headquarters, where they had him taste test different recipes, selecting the one closest to his homemade version. They designed labels with his face and story on them, featuring a small tribute to his father. Your dad would be proud, one of the executives told him. This isn't just a business deal, it's a legacy. Lucas couldn't believe how fast his life was changing. Just days ago, he was a kid trying to sell lemonade on the corner. Now he was on his way to becoming a symbol of perseverance. But amid all the success, the most important moment came when they finally held the funeral for his father. The service was beautiful. The funeral home, having waived all costs, provided a stunning ceremony. The casket was adorned with flowers, and friends and neighbors came to pay their respects. Even some of the strangers who had helped Lucas at his lemonade stand showed up, offering their condolences. Vance himself attended, standing quietly in the back, tipping his head in respect. Lucas stood at the podium, hands gripping the paper, where he had written his eulogy. He took a deep breath, then spoke. "My dad was a great man. He worked hard. He took care of us. He taught me what it meant to be strong. Losing him was the hardest thing I've ever gone through, but it also taught me something. When you're faced with something impossible, when it feels like the world is too big and you're too small, you don't give up. You try. You stand up, and sometimes the world stands up with you." There wasn't a dry eye in the room as the service ended and the sun set over the cemetery. Lucas felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. 1 year after that fateful day, Lucas stood in a grocery store aisle, staring at a row of lemonade bottles. There, in the middle of the display, sat Lucas's legacy lemonade. He picked up a bottle, running his fingers over the label. His story, his father's story, was right there for everyone to see. He smiled. Beside him, his mother placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did it," she whispered. Lucas looked up at her. "No, Mom, we did." As they walked toward the checkout, Lucas's phone buzzed. He pulled it out and saw a message from the vice president's office. Vance had kept in touch, checking in on him every now and then. The message was simple. "Proud of you, kid. Keep going." Lucas smiled, slipping his phone back into his pocket. His father may have been gone, but his story wasn't over. It was just beginning. Months after his lemonade stand changed everything, Lucas found himself standing on a stage in Washington, D.C. He had been invited to speak at a special event celebrating young entrepreneurs and community leaders. The room was filled with government officials, business executives, and inspiring individuals from all walks of life. Lucas adjusted the microphone, his palms sweaty, but he took a deep breath. He had faced harder things than public speaking. "I started with a lemonade stand," he began, his voice steady. "Not because I wanted to make money, but because I needed to. I lost my dad, and I had no idea how we were going to give him the goodbye he deserved. I didn't expect people to stop. I didn't expect the vice president to show up. I didn't expect to be here today. But what I learned is that when you put yourself out there, when you try, even when things seem impossible, people notice, people care, and sometimes they change your life." Applause echoed through the room. After the speech, J.D. Vance approached him, shaking his hand. "You did good, kid, and this is just the beginning." Lucas grinned. "I know." As he left the stage, he thought about his father. Somewhere, somehow, he knew his dad was watching, smiling down at him. Lucas's story had started with grief, but it had become something greater, a story of perseverance, kindness, and the power of community. And As he walked into his future, he knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning.